The lightning split the Colorado sky like God's own judgment, illuminating the half-naked woman on the auction block for one terrible frozen moment before plunging Silver Creek back into darkness. Sarah Katherine Ali stood there in nothing but her torn chemise and the iron shackles around her wrists, her auburn hair plastered to her skull by the driving rain, her green eyes blazing with a defiance that 3 months of hell hadn't been able to break. "What am I bid for this wild Irish mare?" Victor Kozlov's voice cut through the thunder like a rusty blade. The vulture, as they called him, stood beneath the saloon's covered porch, his black coat dry, while the woman he was selling shivered in the storm. "She's got spirit, this one. Nearly took my eye out when we first brought her in." The crowd of miners, drifters, and worse gathered in Silver Creek's muddy Main Street jeered and shouted numbers, but their voices seemed far away to Sarah. The cold was everything now, biting through her skin, turning her bones to ice, making her teeth chatter so hard she was afraid they'd shatter. But she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Not now, not after everything. 100, called out a gap-toothed prospector spitting tobacco juice into the mud. 150, countered a cattle driver, his eyes roving over Sarah's exposed body with the hunger of a man who hadn't seen civilization in months. Another flash of lightning closer this time, and Sarah saw something that made her heart skip movement in the shadows beside the church across the street. Someone was watching from the darkness, someone who didn't belong with this crowd of human vultures. A tall figure in a dark coat sitting motionless on horseback, his face hidden beneath the brim of a hat that somehow stayed dry despite the storm. "Going once for 150. Kozlov raised his gavel, a grotesque parody of legitimate commerce. "Do I hear 200 for this fine piece of Irish flesh?" That's when the world exploded. The first gunshot came from the north end of town, followed immediately by a war cry that cut through the thunder like a banshee's wail. Then the Grayson gang came thundering down Main Street, 20 armed men with their faces covered and their guns blazing, and Silver Creek erupted into chaos. "It's a raid," someone screamed. "They're after Kozlov's girls." The crowd scattered like startled cattle diving for cover behind water troughs and into doorways. Sarah stood frozen on the auction block, suddenly forgotten in the pandemonium. Bullets whined through the air around her, splintering the wooden platform where she stood. One of Kozlov's guards, a brutish man named Silas, who'd taken particular pleasure in her suffering, spun around with blood blooming across his chest and collapsed face first into the mud. This was her chance. Maybe her only chance. Sarah threw herself off the auction block, hitting the muddy street hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs. The shackles on her wrists made movement clumsy, but desperation gave her strength. She rolled under the platform just as another volley of gunfire erupted overhead, the muzzle flashes lighting up the underside of the wooden structure like fireworks. Above her boots thundered across the platform. Men shouted orders and curses in 3 different languages. Someone screamed a high, agonized sound that cut through the gunfire and rain. Sarah pressed herself deeper into the mud, trying to make herself invisible while her mind raced. The Grayson gang was here for Kozlov's operation, but they weren't liberators. They were competitors, and women like her were just merchandise to be stolen and resold. She had to get out of here, now. Crawling on her belly through the mud, Sarah worked her way toward the back of the platform. Her chemise was already ruined, but now it was brown with dirt and torn by splinters. The iron shackles rubbed her wrists raw, but she ignored the pain. Pain was nothing new. Pain was just another country she'd learned to live in. An explosion shook the ground. Someone had thrown dynamite into the Silver Creek bank. More screaming, more gunfire. Through the legs of the platform, Sarah could see muzzle flashes and running figures. A man stumbled past her hiding spot, clutching his shoulder where blood seeped between his fingers. He didn't see her. 20 feet to the nearest alley, 20 feet to the shadows between buildings where she might disappear. Sarah gathered herself like a sprinter, every muscle coiled with desperate energy. The rain was a curtain that might hide her movement if she was fast enough. Quiet enough, lucky enough. She ran. Low and quick, staying in the shadows, Sarah sprinted toward the narrow gap between Murphy's General Store and the barbershop. Behind her, the gun battle raged on. A stray bullet shattered the barbershop window, spraying glass across the muddy ground. Sarah felt a sharp pain in her bare foot, but didn't stop. Couldn't stop. She made it to the alley and pressed herself against the wet wooden wall of the general store, gasping for breath. The rain felt like needles against her exposed skin, but it was washing away the mud and grime, making her feel almost human again. Almost. Well, what have we here? Sarah's heart stopped. She spun around to find herself facing 3 men in the narrow alley. Not Kozlov's men. She'd learned to recognize all of their faces during her captivity. These were strangers, but their intentions were written clearly in their hungry eyes and leering grins. "Looks like one of Kozlov's girls got loose," said the largest of them, a bearded giant with arms like tree trunks. "Reckon she's fair game now." "Please," Sarah whispered, hating the weakness in her voice but unable to stop it. I'm not what you think." The men laughed. "Sure you ain't, honey. They all say that." The giant stepped forward, and Sarah saw her death in his eyes. Not the quick death of a bullet, but something slower and infinitely worse. Her hands curled into fists, the shackles cutting into her wrists. If she was going to die, she'd take at least one of them with her. "That's far enough, gentlemen." The voice came from the mouth of the alley, calm and cultured, with the kind of authority that made men pause without quite knowing why. Sarah and her would-be attackers all turned to see the mysterious figure she'd spotted earlier, the man on horseback who'd been watching from beside the church. He stood silhouetted against the lightning-torn sky, no longer mounted, but somehow still imposing. Tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a long black coat that hung open to reveal a pristine white shirt and a gun belt with pearl-handled revolvers. His face was sharp-featured and weathered with intelligent gray eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Most striking of all was the badge pinned to his vest, a silver star that caught the lightning like a small sun. "Judge Marcus Thornfield, United States Marshal," he said, stepping into the alley with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to violence. "I believe you gentlemen have some business elsewhere." The 3 men exchanged uncertain glances. Even in Silver Creek, where law was scarce and justice scarcer, a federal marshal commanded respect, or at least caution. "We ain't done nothing wrong, Marshal," the giant said, but he'd taken a step back. "Just found this here gal wandering around. Thought maybe she needed protection." "I'm sure you did." Thornfield's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Now I'm going to count to 3, and if you're still in this alley when I'm done, I'm going to assume you're obstructing a federal investigation. 1. The smallest of the 3 men was already backing toward the far end of the alley. 2. The other 2 followed, muttering curses under their breath, but unwilling to test the marshal's resolve. In seconds, Sarah was alone with the man who might be her salvation, or just another predator with better clothes. Thornfield approached slowly, his hands visible and empty. "Miss, I'm not going to hurt you. Are you injured?" Sarah studied his face, looking for the lies she'd learned to expect from men, but his gray eyes were steady and honest, and when lightning flashed again, she saw something unexpected there, compassion. She started, then stopped. What was she? A prisoner, a witness, a ghost of the woman she used to be. "I'm Sarah O'Malley, and I've been waiting 3 months for someone like you." A tremendous crash echoed from the main street as something, probably the Silver Creek Saloon, caught fire. Orange light began to compete with the lightning, and the smell of smoke mixed with the rain-washed air. The gun battle was moving closer. "Miss O'Malley," Thornfield said, his voice urgent now, "we need to get you somewhere safe. This town is about to tear itself apart, and you're going to be caught in the middle if we don't move." "Why?" Sarah asked, even as she prepared to follow him. "Why help me? What do you want?" Thornfield paused at the mouth of the alley, scanning the chaos on Main Street. When he looked back at her, Sarah saw something flicker across his features, recognition. "Because," he said quietly, "I've been looking for you for a very long time." Before Sarah could process what that meant, a new sound cut through the storm, the rhythmic thunder of hoofbeats approaching fast, too fast. Thornfield drew one of his pearl-handled revolvers with a motion so smooth it seemed like magic. "Run," he commanded. "The church, now!" They burst from the alley together, Thornfield slightly ahead with his gun drawn. Sarah stumbling on her injured foot but keeping pace through sheer determination. The church was 50 yards away across the muddy street, its white walls and tall steeple seeming to glow in the firelight from the burning saloon. Behind them, riders rounded the corner, 4 of Kozlov's men, including the vulture himself, mounted on a black stallion and carrying a rifle. His pale eyes found Sarah immediately, and his thin lips curved in a smile that had nothing to do with humor. "There!" he shouted over the storm. "The Irish bitch! Don't let her escape!" Thornfield spun and fired without seeming to aim. One of the riders pitched backward from his saddle with a scream, his horse rearing and disrupting the others. But Kozlov was already raising his rifle, and Sarah saw her death approaching at the speed of a bullet. The marshal tackled her sideways just as the rifle cracked. They hit the mud hard and rolled Thornfield's body, shielding her from the worst of the impact. Sarah felt rather than saw the bullet pass over them close enough to part her hair. "Move!" Thornfield hauled her to her feet, and they ran for the church as more gunfire erupted behind them. Sarah's lungs burned and her injured foot left bloody prints in the mud, but she kept pace. The church door seemed impossibly far away, then suddenly it was right there. Thornfield grabbed the iron handle and pulled, locked. "Stand back," he ordered, raising his boot. The door exploded inward with a crash of splintering wood, and they tumbled inside just as another volley of bullets chewed splinters from the doorframe. The church was dark and cool, a sanctuary that smelled of beeswax candles and old hymns. Moonlight filtering through stained glass windows painted the interior in jeweled colors. Blues and reds and golds that seemed to promise peace and redemption. For a moment, Sarah felt herself relax for the first time in months. Then Thornfield was moving again, checking the windows, barricading the door with a wooden pew. His movements were economical and professional, the actions of a man who'd been in similar situations before. "They'll surround the building," he said without looking at her. "But they won't rush it immediately. Even Kozlov isn't crazy enough to start a gunfight in a church, not with the whole town watching." Sarah sank onto one of the pews, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the escape was fading, leaving behind bone-deep weariness and the kind of cold that went all the way to her soul. She was still wearing nothing but her torn chemise, and now that they were out of the rain, she became acutely aware of how she must look like exactly what everyone thought she was. "Here." Thornfield shrugged out of his long black coat and held it out to her. "You're hypothermic. This will help." Sarah stared at the offered garment, paralyzed by unexpected kindness. I'm not clean. I'll ruin it." "It's just a coat, Miss O'Malley. Nothing that can't be replaced." She took the coat with trembling hands and wrapped it around herself. It was warm from his body heat and smelled of leather and gunpowder and something indefinably masculine. For the first time in months, she felt covered rather than exposed. "You said you'd been looking for me," she said once she could trust her voice again. "What did you mean?" Thornfield had moved to one of the windows and was peering out through a gap in the colored glass. "Tell me, Miss O'Malley, are you familiar with a man named Edmund Carruthers, wealthy businessman from Denver? Big house on 14th Street. Sarah's blood turned to ice water. "How do you know about—" "Because." Thornfield turned from the window, his gray eyes intense. "There's a $5,000 reward for information leading to the whereabouts of one Sarah Katherine O'Malley, missing witness in the murder case of James Mitchell Hartwell. Case number 1972-47 in the Denver District Court." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. "Missing witness. But I'm not missing. I'm here. I've been here trapped, sold like cattle." "I know." Thornfield's voice was gentle now. "The question is, are you willing to testify about what you saw in Edmund Carruthers' study 3 months ago?" Sarah closed her eyes, and the memory came flooding back with perfect, terrible clarity. She'd been in the Carruthers mansion for 6 months, teaching their daughter piano and literature when she'd heard the shouting from the study. She'd gone to investigate Foolish She Knew Now, and arrived just in time to see Edmund Carruthers shoot James Hartwell in the chest with a derringer. She'd tried to scream and found herself grabbed from behind by Carruthers' business partner, a man she'd known only as Mr. Dimitri. They'd dragged her to the basement, and the next thing she knew, she was waking up in a wagon bound for the Colorado Territory and a life of slavery she'd never imagined possible. "They said he was still alive," she whispered. "When they brought me here, Kozlov said that Hartwell was alive and that I was a murderer, that I'd tried to kill him and stolen money from the safe. James Hartwell died from his wounds 2 days after you disappeared," Thornfield said quietly. "Edmund Carruthers claimed that you shot him during a robbery attempt. He had witnesses, his servants, all of whom owed their livelihoods to his generosity. The Denver police believed his story completely. Until..." Until Hartwell's widow found some interesting documents in her husband's papers. Seems Mr. Hartwell had been investigating certain irregularities in Carruthers' shipping business. Import as export concerns that didn't quite match the manifests. Goods that arrived but never reached their intended destinations. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. What kind of goods? People miss O'Malley, women specifically. Young women from immigrant families who wouldn't be missed, or who could be made to disappear from the official records. The pieces clicked together in Sarah's mind with horrible clarity. The Carruthers household. They had so many servants, but they were always changing. Girls would be there for a few weeks, then just gone. Mrs. Carruthers said they were unreliable, that they'd run off. But you didn't run off, did you? You were sold. Before Sarah could answer, a new voice cut through the night air outside the church, Kozlov's voice raised in false civility. Marshal Thornfield, I know you're in there with my property. Let's discuss this like civilized men. Thornfield moved back to the window. Stay down, he warned Sarah, then called out. Miss O'Malley isn't property Kozlov. She's a material witness in a federal investigation. That's where you're wrong, Marshal. Kozlov's voice held a note of triumph that made Sarah's skin crawl. I have a perfectly legal bill of sale for one Sarah O'Malley purchased from her legal guardian for the sum of $200, plus interest, of course. Legal guardian. Why Edmund Carruthers himself? Seems the girl was in his employ when she committed murder and theft. As her employer, he had every right to sell her to cover the damages, all perfectly legal, I assure you. Thornfield cursed under his breath. Show me the papers. A moment later, a folded document came flying through the broken church door, landing on the floor near the altar. Thornfield retrieved it carefully, his face grim as he scanned the contents by candlelight. Is it real? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer from his expression. It's real enough, he said quietly. Signed, sealed, and witnessed. According to this, Edmund Carruthers had legal authority to sell you to cover debts incurred by your alleged crimes. So I really am property. Sarah felt something inside her breaking, some last desperate hope crumbling to dust. Even if I testify, even if I tell the truth about what I saw, it won't matter. Carruthers has covered his tracks. There's another way. Thornfield folded the document and tucked it inside his vest. But you're not going to like it. Before he could explain, Kozlov's voice rang out again. You have 5 minutes to return my property, Marshal. After that, my boys and I come in shooting. And I guarantee you won't like what we do to the girl before we're finished with her. Sarah felt the familiar terror rising in her throat, the helpless panic that had nearly broken her during those first weeks of captivity. But then she looked at Thornfield, saw the determination in his gray eyes, and felt something else stirring. Something harder and more dangerous than fear. What's the other way? She asked. Thornfield smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, Sarah saw something predatory in his expression. I buy you myself. What? If Kozlov's sale documents are legal, then you're currently his property. But property can be sold again, especially if the price is right. And I happen to be a very wealthy man. Sarah stared at him in shock. You want to buy me like they did? I want to give you a choice, Thornfield corrected. Work for me as a free woman, helping to expose Carruthers and his trafficking network, or accept transport to any destination you choose with enough money to start a new life. Either way, you'd be free of Kozlov. It wasn't really a choice, and they both knew it. Sarah could see the calculation in his eyes. He needed her testimony to bring down Carruthers, and this was the only way to get it legally. But she also saw something else there, something that looked almost like genuine concern for her welfare. How much? She asked. $500 in gold. Sarah's eyes widened. It was more money than most people in Silver Creek saw in a year, certainly more than Kozlov had expected to get for her at auction. Time's up, Marshal, Kozlov called from outside. Send out the girl or we're coming in. Thornfield checked his revolvers, ensuring both were fully loaded. What's it going to be, Miss O'Malley? Do we fight our way out of here and take our chances in the wilderness, or do we play Kozlov's game and try to beat him at it? Sarah thought about the 3 months of hell she'd endured, the degradation and terror and hopelessness. She thought about Edmund Carruthers and his cold eyes as he'd pulled the trigger. She thought about James Hartwell's widow somewhere in Denver, seeking justice for her murdered husband. "Make the deal," she said. Thornfield nodded and moved to the broken door. "Kozlov, I'm prepared to negotiate." "I thought you might see reason, Marshal. What are you offering? $500 in gold for the woman. Final sale, no returns, no questions asked." There was a long pause. Sarah could almost hear Kozlov's mind working, weighing the certainty of immediate profit against the potential for greater gain through other means. "Show me the gold first." Thornfield reached into his coat and produced a leather pouch that clinked heavily as he shook it. "It's here. But I want to see the woman's bill of sale and transfer papers first. This needs to be legal." Another pause, then Kozlov's voice. "My man is coming to the door. No sudden movements or this ends badly for everyone." A thin, nervous-looking man in a bowler hat approached the church entrance, his hands raised to show he carried only papers. Thornfield met him at the threshold, and they conducted a quick exchange documents for gold. Sarah watched from the shadows, feeling surreal about being sold like livestock, even if it was for her own freedom. The transaction took less than 5 minutes. When it was done, Kozlov called out once more, "Pleasure doing business with you, Marshal. The woman is yours now. Try not to break her too quickly." Then the sound of hoofbeats as Kozlov and his men rode away, leaving Sarah and Thornfield alone in the candlelit church. "Is it over?" Sarah asked, hardly daring to believe it. "This part is." Thornfield holstered his weapons and turned to face her. "But now the real work begins. Edmund Carruthers has a network that spans 3 states and involves some very powerful people. Taking him down won't be easy and it won't be safe." "What makes you think I can do it? What makes you think I'm strong enough?" Thornfield studied her face in the candlelight, taking in the defiant set of her jaw, the unbroken spirit in her green eyes, the way she held herself despite everything she'd endured. "Because," he said quietly, "you've already survived the worst they could do to you, and you're still fighting." Thunder rumbled overhead, but the storm was moving away, taking its violence with it. Through the stained glass windows, Sarah could see the first pale hint of dawn on the eastern horizon. A new day was coming, and with it the chance for something she'd almost forgotten existed: hope. But even as she allowed herself to feel that hope, Sarah couldn't shake the sense that this was only the beginning. Kozlov had given up too easily, taken the money too readily. Men like him didn't simply walk away from valuable property without a fight. She was right to be suspicious. Even as she and Thornfield prepared to leave the church, riders were already galloping hard toward Silver Creek federal marshals, carrying arrest warrants and traveling much faster than any honest lawman should. The trap was closing around them, and Sarah was about to learn that sometimes salvation comes with a price higher than anyone should have to pay. Outside, the storm clouds gathered again, as if the sky itself knew that the real tempest was just beginning. The first bullet shattered the church window 3 seconds after dawn, spraying colored glass across the altar where Sarah and Thornfield had been standing. They hit the floor hard as a second shot splintered the wooden cross above them, and Sarah realized with cold certainty that Kozlov's easy surrender had been exactly what it appeared to be: a trap. "Federal marshals!" The voice boomed from outside, authoritative and implacable. "Marcus Thornfield, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice and harboring a fugitive. Come out with your hands visible." Thornfield's gray eyes met Sarah's in the kaleidoscope of light streaming through the broken window. "Those aren't federal marshals," he said quietly, checking his revolvers with practiced efficiency. "Real marshals don't announce themselves with gunfire." "Then who?" "Kozlov's next play. He keeps the gold and gets you back." Thornfield crawled to another window, staying low. "Smart bastard, probably had them waiting in the hills." Sarah felt the familiar taste of copper fear in her mouth, but underneath it was something new and fierce anger. For 3 months she'd been pushed around, sold, bartered, and brutalized. She was tired of being a pawn in other people's games. "How many?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Thornfield peered through a gap in the stained glass. "8 that I can see. Professional shooters by the look of them. Expensive. Too expensive for Kozlov alone. Much too expensive." Thornfield's expression darkened, "which means someone with real money wants you silenced permanently. Someone who can afford to hire fake federal agents and doesn't care about the legal complications." Edmund Carruthers. Sarah didn't need to speak the name aloud. They both knew who had the resources and motivation to stage such an elaborate deception. The wealthy Denver businessman wasn't content to simply hide behind forged documents. He wanted her dead, and he was willing to pay handsomely for the privilege. "There's another way out," Thornfield said, moving away from the window. "The church has a root cellar that connects to an old mining tunnel, built during the Apache Troubles 15 years ago as an escape route." "You seem to know a lot about Silver Creek's architecture for a visiting marshal." Thornfield's smile was grim. "I've been planning for this conversation a lot longer than you might think, Miss O'Malley." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, a new voice joined the chorus outside, younger, nervous, but carrying the unmistakable authority of genuine law enforcement. "This is Deputy Thomas Garrett of the Larimer County Sheriff's Department. Lower your weapons immediately. You're not authorized to operate in this jurisdiction." The response was swift and brutal. Gunfire erupted from multiple positions, and Sarah heard a man cry out in pain. When the shooting stopped, the false marshal's voice rang out again. "Anyone else want to play hero?" "Jesus," Thornfield breathed. "They just shot a real deputy. This isn't about you anymore, Sarah. Someone's willing to kill lawmen to keep you quiet. That means they're more desperate than we thought." Sarah finished the sentence, her mind racing. "And desperate people make mistakes." Thornfield looked at her with new respect. "What are you thinking?" Sarah rose from the floor, and Thornfield's black coat still wrapped around her like armor. "I'm thinking that if they wanted me dead, they could have burned this church down around us. They want me alive, which means they need something from me first." "Information? About what you saw in Carruthers' study?" "More than that." Sarah moved to the altar, where morning light streaming through the damaged windows illuminated the gilt-edged Bible. "They need to know what James Hartwell told me before he died." Thornfield's head snapped up. "Hartwell spoke to you? You never mentioned—" "Because I wasn't sure if it was real or if I'd imagined it." Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. "He was dying, bleeding out on Carruthers' Persian rug, but before he lost consciousness, he grabbed my hand and said something, a name." "What name?" Before Sarah could answer, a new sound cut through the morning air, the rhythmic thunder of many hoofbeats approaching fast. Both Sarah and Thornfield moved to the windows, peering out at a sight that made Sarah's heart skip with desperate hope. A column of riders was approaching Silver Creek from the south, their horses kicking up a cloud of dust visible for miles. At their head rode a woman Sarah had never seen before, tall and elegant even in the saddle, with long black hair, and the kind of natural authority that made men follow without question. Behind her came at least 20 armed riders, their rifles gleaming in the morning sun. "Who is that?" Sarah breathed. Thornfield's expression had gone completely still, the kind of stillness that comes before an explosion. "Isabella Santos. And that changes everything." "Santos? But that's—" "A Spanish name, yes. Isabella runs the largest ranch in 3 counties, plus half the legitimate businesses in Silver Creek. She also happens to run the most effective underground railroad operation between here and the Mexican border." Sarah stared at the approaching riders. "Underground railroad? You mean she helps slaves escape?" "Not just runaway slaves. Anyone who needs to disappear, women fleeing bad marriages, children escaping abusive families, witnesses whose testimony might prove inconvenient to powerful men." Thornfield's voice carried a strange undercurrent Sarah couldn't identify. "If Isabella Santos is here, it means she knows about you, and that means—" The gunfire outside ceased abruptly as the fake marshals realized they were suddenly outnumbered 3-1. Isabella's voice rang out across the town square, clear and commanding. "Gentlemen, you appear to be operating without proper jurisdiction in my territory. I suggest you state your business quickly and truthfully, or find yourselves escorted to the county line with prejudice." The false marshal's response was predictably aggressive. "This is federal business, lady. Turn around and ride away before you get hurt." Isabella's laugh was like silver bells touched with steel. "Federal business. How fascinating. I'd love to see your credentials. Deputy Garrett, are you still alive?" "Barely," came a weak voice from somewhere near the barbershop. "Shot in the shoulder. These men attacked without provocation and refused to identify themselves properly." "I see. Well, that simplifies matters considerably." What happened next was like watching a chess master execute a perfect gambit. Isabella's riders spread out with military precision surrounding the false marshals while maintaining clear lines of fire that wouldn't endanger the church or any innocent bystanders. Within minutes, the hunters had become the hunted. "Last chance, gentlemen," Isabella called out. "Surrender your weapons and submit to proper arrest, or discover how seriously we take the shooting of peace officers in my county." The answer came in the form of desperate gunfire as the trapped men tried to shoot their way out. But Isabella's riders were clearly veterans of frontier warfare, and the battle was over in less than 2 minutes. When the gun smoke cleared, 3 of the false marshals lay dead in the street. 4 were wounded and disarmed, and 1 had vanished entirely, probably making a run for the hills on foot. "Marshal Thornfield," Isabella called toward the church, "I believe it's safe to come out now. We have matters to discuss." Sarah followed Thornfield through the broken church door, still wrapped in his coat and acutely aware that she was about to meet this remarkable woman while wearing little more than rags. But when Isabella Santos dismounted and approached them, Sarah forgot all about her appearance. The woman was stunning in a way that had nothing to do with conventional beauty. Tall and lean, with the easy grace of someone equally comfortable in a drawing room or on a battlefield, she had intelligent dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Her clothes were practical but expensive leather riding pants, a white cotton shirt, and a vest embroidered with silver thread. A gun belt hung low on her hips, and the pistol it carried showed the wear of frequent use. "Marshal Thornfield," Isabella said, extending her hand with the confidence of someone accustomed to being treated as an equal. "It's been far too long." "Isabella." Thornfield shook her hand, but Sarah caught something in his expression, a mixture of gratitude, wariness, and something that might have been old pain. "Thank you for the assistance, though I have to wonder how you knew we needed it." Information travels fast in small communities, especially when it involves federal marshals and mysterious women. Isabella's gaze shifted to Sarah, and her expression softened. "You must be Miss O'Malley. I've heard quite a lot about you." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Nothing good, I'm sure." "On the contrary, I've heard that you're a woman of considerable courage and integrity who has survived experiences that would have broken most people." Isabella's voice carried genuine warmth. "I've also heard that certain powerful interests want you silenced permanently. That makes you exactly the kind of person my organization exists to protect." "Your organization?" Isabella smiled. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. My ranch is 20 miles south of here, and I suspect we all have a great deal to discuss." Thornfield nodded. "Agreed. But first we need to deal with the wounded deputies and the surviving attackers." "Already handled. My men are providing medical assistance to Deputy Garrett, and the surviving attackers will be transported to the county seat for proper interrogation. With any luck, we'll learn who hired them and what instructions they were given." Sarah watched this exchange with growing fascination. These two clearly knew each other well, and there was an undercurrent of history between them that went beyond professional cooperation. Moreover, Isabella Santos was the first person Sarah had met who seemed completely unintimidated by the forces arrayed against them. "Miss O'Malley," Isabella said, turning back to her, "I hope you don't mind me saying so, but you look like you could use a hot bath, a proper meal, and some clothes that fit. My ranch can provide all 3 plus security while we plan our next moves." The offer was tempting almost beyond words. Sarah hadn't had a real bath in 3 months, and the thought of clean clothes and abundant food made her mouth water. But she'd learned to be suspicious of generous offers. "What do you want in return?" she asked bluntly. Isabella's smile widened. "Direct. I like that. What I want, Miss O'Malley, is to put Edmund Carruthers and his entire network out of business permanently. From what I understand, you may be the key to making that happen. Because of what I witnessed in his study. Because of what you witnessed, what you know, and what you represent." Isabella's expression grew serious. "Carruthers isn't just a murderer, Miss O'Malley. He's the center of a trafficking network that has destroyed hundreds of lives across 3 states, young women like yourself taken from their families and sold into slavery that makes the old plantation system look humane by comparison." Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach. "How many?" "We estimate over 300 in the past 2 years alone. Most are never seen again." Isabella's voice carried the weight of personal grief. Some are worked to death in illegal mining operations. Others disappear into brothels in San Francisco or Mexico City. A few, the lucky ones, end up in situations like yours, sold as domestic servants or wives to men who treat them like property. The numbers were staggering, almost incomprehensible. Sarah thought about the other women she'd glimpsed during her captivity, frightened faces in darkened wagons, sobbing voices in the night, empty eyes that had given up hope entirely. 300, she whispered, at minimum. And Carruthers is protected by corrupt officials, false documents, and enough money to buy his way out of almost any legal trouble. Isabella's jaw tightened. But he's not protected against the truth spoken by a credible witness who can't be bought or intimidated. You think I'm credible? Sarah couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. I'm a former governess who spent 3 months as a slave. Who's going to believe my word against that of a respected businessman? A federal judge if we present the case properly, Thornfield interjected. That's why we need to get you somewhere safe while we build an airtight case. Isabella nodded. My ranch has housed witnesses before. We've never lost one yet. Sarah looked between these two remarkable people, the mysterious marshal with his hidden depths and the elegant rancher who commanded respect from hardened gunfighters. For the first time since her ordeal began, she felt like she might actually have allies worthy of the enemies they faced. All right, she said, but I want to know everything. No more secrets, no more half-truths. If I'm going to trust you with my life, I need to understand exactly what we're up against. Isabella and Thornfield exchanged a meaningful glance. Fair enough, Isabella said, but some conversations are better held in private with secure walls around them. Shall we? The ride to Isabella's ranch took them through some of the most beautiful country Sarah had ever seen. Rolling hills covered with pine and aspen gave way to broad valleys where cattle grazed peacefully under the endless Colorado sky. The air was clean and sharp, scented with wildflowers, and the promise of snow from the distant peaks. Isabella had provided Sarah with a proper riding habit borrowed from one of her household staff, and the simple luxury of clean, well-fitting clothes had done wonders for her morale. She rode between Isabella and Thornfield, surrounded by armed guards who treated her with respectful deference rather than the suspicion she'd learned to expect. Tell me about your family, Isabella said, as they crested a ridge that offered a spectacular view of the valley below. Do they know what happened to you? Sarah's throat tightened. I have no family. My parents died of cholera when I was 16. That's how I ended up working as a governess. It was one of the few respectable occupations available to an educated woman without connections. No siblings, cousins. Anyone who might be worried about your disappearance. No one. The words came out more bitter than Sarah had intended, which is probably why Carruthers chose me. No one to ask awkward questions when I vanished. Isabella's expression softened with sympathy. You're not alone anymore, Sarah. Whatever happens, you have allies now. The kindness in her voice nearly broke Sarah's composure. She'd grown so accustomed to viewing every human interaction as a potential threat that simple compassion felt overwhelming. Why? She managed to ask. Why do you care what happens to me? What do you get out of helping me? Isabella was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes fixed on the horizon. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of old pain. 5 years ago, I had a younger sister named Maria. She was beautiful, intelligent, full of dreams about traveling to San Francisco and becoming a teacher. One day, she was visiting friends in Denver, and the next day she was gone, vanished without a trace. Sarah felt her heart sink. Carruthers. We could never prove it, but Maria disappeared the same week 3 other young women went missing from respectable families. All of them were educated, all were traveling alone, and all had some connection to Carruthers' business interests. Did you ever find her? Isabella's jaw tightened. We found her grave 2 years later in an unmarked plot outside a mining camp in Nevada. According to the records we could piece together, she'd been sold to the mine owner as a wife. She died of pneumonia after 18 months of conditions you can probably imagine. The story hit Sarah like a physical blow. She thought about all the women who'd shared her captivity, all the frightened faces she'd glimpsed in passing. How many of them were lying in unmarked graves now? How many sisters and daughters had simply vanished into Carruthers' network, never to be seen again? "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be sorry, be angry." Isabella's voice carried an edge of steel. "Maria can't be saved, but you can, and through you maybe we can save others." They rode in contemplative silence for the next hour, each lost in their own thoughts. Sarah found herself studying Thornfield, trying to understand the complex man who'd bought her freedom and then offered her a choice. There was something about him that didn't quite fit a refinement that went beyond simple education, an authority that seemed to come from sources deeper than his marshal's badge. "You're not really a federal marshal, are you?" she said suddenly. Thornfield's gray eyes met hers without surprise. "What makes you say that? Real marshals don't carry $500 in gold for casual transactions. They don't know the architectural details of every church in every town they visit. And they don't inspire the kind of respect Isabella's men showed you." Very observant. "So what are you really?" Thornfield considered his answer carefully. "I'm exactly what I told you. I'm a federal marshal with a legitimate appointment and authority, but that's not all I am." "Care to elaborate?" "My family owns land, quite a lot of land actually, mining interests, cattle ranches, railroad investments. The marshal's position allows me to travel freely and investigate matters that might otherwise be difficult to pursue through legal channels." Sarah felt pieces clicking together in her mind. "You're hunting Carruthers for personal reasons." "I'm hunting him because he's a criminal who's escaped justice for too long. But yes, there are personal elements involved." "Such as?" Isabella answered for him. "Such as the fact that Carruthers' network has been encroaching on Marcus's family's territory for the past year. Stealing women from towns where the Thornfield name carries weight, corrupting officials the family has worked with for decades." "It's not about territory," Thornfield corrected, but without heat. "It's about responsibility. My family has influence in these regions, which means we have an obligation to protect the people who depend on us." Sarah studied his face. Seeing something there, she recognized the burden of someone who'd been raised to believe that privilege came with duties. "You feel responsible for what happened to me. I feel responsible for what happened to all of them, including Maria." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Sarah began to understand the complex web of motivations and relationships that had brought these three people together. Isabella seeking justice for her sister, Thornfield fighting to protect his family's sphere of influence, and herself caught in the middle as both victim and key to bringing down their common enemy. "There's something else," she said slowly. "Something I haven't told you about what James Hartwell said before he died." Both Isabella and Thornfield turned to look at her, their attention sharp and focused. "He didn't just give me a name, he gave me an address, a place in San Francisco where he said I could find proof of everything Carruthers was doing." Thornfield reined in his horse. "What kind of proof?" "Financial records, shipping manifests, names and dates and amounts." Sarah's voice grew stronger as she remembered the dying man's urgent whispers. "He said Carruthers was keeping duplicate records of every transaction, every sale, every woman who passed through the network. Insurance in case his partners tried to betray him." Isabella's eyes blazed with sudden hope. "Where in San Francisco?" "That's the problem. Hartwell died before he could give me the complete address. All I have is a partial name, something about a warehouse near the docks owned by a company called Pacific Maritime." "Pacific Maritime." Thornfield repeated the name thoughtfully. "I know that company. They handle import-export for half the legitimate businesses on the West Coast. And probably all the illegitimate ones too," Isabella added grimly. "If Carruthers is using them to move his human cargo, there would definitely be records." Sarah felt a chill of premonition. "You're thinking about going to San Francisco, aren't you?" "I'm thinking about ending this," Isabella replied. "If those records exist, they could bring down the entire network, not just Carruthers, but everyone who's been helping him. It's too dangerous. Carruthers will be expecting us to follow any leads Hartwell might have given me. The warehouse will be watched, probably heavily guarded." "Maybe, but it's also our best chance to gather enough evidence to ensure convictions rather than just accusations." Thornfield nodded slowly. "Isabella's right. Testimony can be discredited, witnesses can be silenced, but financial records, shipping manifests, detailed transaction logs, that's the kind of evidence that stands up in court. Sarah felt the familiar weight of other people's expectations settling on her shoulders. Once again, she was being asked to risk everything for the chance of justice. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't alone. "If we do this," she said carefully, "what happens afterward? Assuming we survive and get the evidence and bring down Carruthers, what happens to me?" Isabella and Thornfield exchanged another of their meaningful glances. "What do you want to happen?" Isabella asked. Sarah considered the question seriously. For months, her only goal had been survival. She'd never allowed herself to think beyond escape, beyond simple freedom from captivity. But now, with real allies and genuine hope, she could dare to imagine a future. "I want to teach again," she said finally. "I want to help other women who've been through what I've experienced, and I want to make sure men like Carruthers never hurt anyone else." "All worthy goals," Thornfield said, "and all achievable if we're successful." "When we're successful," Isabella corrected firmly. "Failure isn't an option. Too many lives depend on stopping this network." As if summoned by her words, a rider appeared on the trail behind them, one of Isabella's scouts galloping hard with the urgency of important news. Isabella raised her hand to halt the group, and the scout quickly covered the distance between them. "Ma'am," he said, touching his hat respectfully, "we've got trouble coming up fast. Large group of riders heading this way, from the north, maybe 30 men all armed and moving like they mean business." Isabella's expression hardened. "Kozlov." "No, ma'am. These are better organized, better equipped. Professional soldiers, not hired guns." Sarah felt her heart sink. "More fake marshals." "Worse," Thornfield said grimly. "If they're sending 30 men, it means someone's decided to end this permanently. No more attempts at legal capture." Isabella made a quick decision. "How long until they reach us?" 2 hours, maybe less. "Then we run. Martinez take point. Rodriguez cover our back trail. Everyone else tight formation around our guests. We're not making a stand out here in the open." As they spurred their horses to greater speed, Sarah felt the familiar terror rising in her throat. Just when she'd begun to hope, just when she'd started to believe in the possibility of justice, the nightmare was starting all over again. But this time she noticed the fear was mixed with something else: determination. She was tired of running, tired of being hunted like an animal. If Carruthers wanted her silenced so badly, it meant she posed a real threat to him. That was something worth fighting for. The race across the Colorado wilderness had begun, and Sarah O'Malley was no longer just a victim fleeing her captors. She was a weapon pointed at the heart of a criminal empire, and she had allies willing to die to ensure she reached her target. Behind them, dust clouds marked the approach of their enemies. Ahead lay the uncertain promise of sanctuary and the chance to strike back. Sarah leaned low over her horse's neck and rode toward whatever destiny awaited, no longer afraid of what she might become in the crucible of this conflict. The Irish governess was gone, burned away in the fires of captivity and betrayal. What emerged in her place was something far more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The first explosion shattered the morning silence at exactly 6:30, sending a column of black smoke into the Colorado sky from what had been Isabella's prize stallion barn. Sarah jerked awake in the guest bedroom where she'd finally managed 2 hours of sleep, her body already moving before her mind fully processed the danger. "They found us," she whispered to the empty room, then louder, "They found us." The second explosion followed 10 seconds later, the grain silo this time erupting in a shower of sparks and burning wheat that fell like deadly snow across the ranch compound. Through her window, Sarah could see armed figures moving through the pre-dawn darkness, at least 40 of them surrounding the main house with military precision. She was pulling on her boots when her bedroom door burst open. Isabella stood there fully dressed and armed, her dark hair braided for battle and her eyes blazing with cold fury. "How many?" Sarah asked, buckling her gun belt. Isabella had insisted she learn to shoot during their 3 days at the ranch. "Too many. They brought a goddamn army." Isabella handed her a rifle and a bandolier of ammunition. "Professional soldiers, not hired guns. Someone wants this finished permanently." "Carruthers." "Has to be, but he's got backing we didn't expect." Isabella moved to the window, peering out at the attackers. Federal uniforms, military coordination, heavy weapons. This isn't just about silencing one witness anymore. A third explosion closer this time, the bunkhouse where Isabella's ranch hands lived. Sarah saw men running from the burning building, some on fire, others cut down by rifle fire before they made it to cover. The casual brutality of it made her stomach clench. "Where's Thornfield?" "Marcus went to check the tunnel system an hour ago. Should be in the mine shafts by now." Isabella's voice carried worry she was trying to hide. "The plan was for him to scout our escape route while we gathered the evidence files." "What evidence files?" Isabella smiled grimly. "Did you think I was just running a ranch out here? Come on." They moved through the house quickly, Isabella leading Sarah down a hidden staircase behind the kitchen pantry. The passage descended into bedrock lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. After 50 feet, it opened into a large chamber that took Sarah's breath away. The room was a command center worthy of a military operation. Maps covered every wall marked with red pins indicating trafficking routes, safe houses, and known enemy positions. Filing cabinets lined one wall filled with what looked like thousands of documents. Telegraph equipment occupied one corner, its brass keys still warm from recent use. "Jesus," Sarah breathed. "How long have you been building this?" "4 years. Ever since Maria disappeared." Isabella moved to one of the filing cabinets, pulling out thick folders marked with dates and locations. "We've been tracking Carruthers' network across 3 states, documenting every transaction, every route, every corrupt official who's taken his money. The Underground Railroad isn't just about moving people to safety, Sarah. It's about gathering intelligence on the bastards who hunt them." Isabella stuffed the folders into a leather satchel. "Marcus has been feeding us information from his marshal contacts. I've been placing my people in key positions throughout the network. Together, we've mapped out the entire operation." A tremendous crash shook the house above them, followed by the sound of boots on wooden floors. The attackers had breached the main building. "They're inside," Sarah said, checking her rifle. "Expected. This room is hidden, but they'll find it eventually." Isabella moved to another cabinet, this one secured with multiple locks. "Help me with this." And together they lifted out a heavy wooden box marked with shipping labels from San Francisco. Isabella opened it to reveal stacks of documents, photographs, and what looked like ledger books. Pacific Maritime. Sarah recognized the company name from Hartwell's dying words. More than that, these are duplicate records from every transaction Carruthers has made through them in the past 2 years. Names, dates, amounts, destinations. Isabella's eyes gleamed with triumph. Everything we need to destroy his entire network. "How did you get them?" "Let's just say Carruthers isn't the only one who can place people in useful positions." Isabella began stuffing the documents into another satchel. "My cousin Elena has been working as a clerk in their San Francisco office for 18 months. Took us that long to get copies of everything." Voices echoed from the staircase above, men calling orders, searching systematically. They had maybe 5 minutes before the hidden door was discovered. "There's another way out," Isabella said, moving to what looked like a solid stone wall. She pressed a hidden lever and a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a tunnel that disappeared into darkness. "This connects to the old mining system. Marcus should be somewhere in there." "Should be? He's been gone 3 hours. Should have been back by now." Isabella's voice carried real worry. "Something's wrong." They gathered the satchels and moved into the tunnel, Isabella carrying a lantern to light their way. The passage was rough-hewn stone, barely wide enough for 2 people, and it sloped downward into the mountain. After 100 yards, it opened into a larger tunnel with iron rails running down the center part of the original mine workings. "Marcus?" Isabella called softly. "Marcus, are you here?" No answer. Only the sound of dripping water and their own breathing. "We can't wait," Sarah said, though she hated abandoning Thornfield. "If he's in trouble, we can't help him by getting captured ourselves." Isabella nodded reluctantly. "You're right. We follow the main tunnel to the river crossing, then—" The gunshot came from behind them, echoing through the stone passages like thunder. Isabella spun around, her pistol already in her hand, as boots pounded down the tunnel they'd just left. "Found the hidden room," a voice shouted. "They went into the mines." "Run," Isabella commanded. They ran through the winding tunnels, their lantern casting wild shadows on the walls. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, multiple men with torches moving fast despite the difficult terrain. The tunnel branched and branched again, creating a maze that would have been impossible to navigate without Isabella's knowledge of the system. "This way." Isabella gasped, turning down a side passage. There's a chamber ahead where we can make a stand. But when they reached the chamber, they found they weren't alone. Marcus Thornfield sat tied to a support beam in the center of the space, his face bloody and his marshal's badge torn from his vest. Standing behind him with a knife to his throat was a man Sarah recognized with sick dread, Dmitry Volkov, Carruthers' business partner, and the man who'd supervised her original capture in Denver. "Miss O'Malley," Dmitry said pleasantly as if they were meeting at a social gathering. "How delightful to see you again. And Isabella Santos, such a pleasure to finally meet the woman who's caused us so much trouble." Isabella's gun was already aimed at Dmitry's head. "Let him go, you Russian bastard." "Ah, but that would be poor business practice. You see, Marshal Thornfield has been most informative about your operations here. Did you know he's been in contact with federal authorities in Washington? Apparently, there's been quite a lot of interest in Mr. Carruthers' business activities at the highest levels." Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that your little crusade has attracted attention we hadn't anticipated. Senators asking questions, federal judges demanding investigations. Most inconvenient." Dmitry's knife pressed closer to Thornfield's throat. "But also most fortunate since it's given us the opportunity to eliminate all of our problems at once." "What do you want?" Isabella demanded. "The documents you've stolen, of course. All of them. Plus the location of any other evidence you've gathered." Dmitry smiled coldly. "In exchange, I'll kill you quickly instead of selling you back into the network. Given what you've cost us, I think that's quite generous." Thornfield raised his head, his gray eyes meeting Sarah's. "Don't give him anything," he said through split lips. "He's going to kill us regardless." Dmitry backhanded him casually. "Quite true, I'm afraid, but the manner of your deaths can vary considerably. Miss O'Malley, you remember how creative we can be with uncooperative women." The memory of her 3 months in captivity flooded back the systematic brutality, the deliberate humiliation, the casual cruelty of men who viewed women as objects to be used and discarded. But alongside the fear came something else, rage. "Sarah," Isabella whispered, "I can take the shot, but you'll hit Marcus." Sarah finished. She could see the problem. Dmitry was using Thornfield's body as a shield, keeping himself protected while maintaining the threat. Any shot Isabella took would risk killing the man they were trying to save. "Smart girls," Dmitry approved. "Now the documents, slowly." Sarah's mind raced looking for options. The chamber they were in had multiple entrances. She could see at least 3 other tunnels leading away into darkness. If she could create a distraction, maybe Isabella could get a clear shot. "The documents are in San Francisco," Sarah said, buying time. "We never brought them here." Dmitry's expression darkened. "Don't lie to me, Irish bitch. My men saw you carry satchels into these tunnels." "Maps and money," Sarah replied smoothly. "We needed navigation aids and funds for the journey west. The real evidence is hidden in a bank vault in San Francisco." "Which bank?" Sarah opened her mouth to answer, then heard something that made her heart skip, the distant sound of gunfire echoing through the tunnels. Not the random shots of pursuing soldiers, but the organized volleys of a coordinated attack. Dmitry heard it too. His knife hand tensed against Thornfield's throat. "What?" The explosion came from the tunnel entrance they'd used, close enough to shake dust from the ceiling and snuff out half their lanterns. In the sudden semi-darkness, Isabella moved like a striking snake. Her shot took Dmitry in the shoulder, spinning him away from Thornfield, and Sarah was already diving for the dropped knife. But Dmitry was faster than he looked. Even wounded, he rolled away from Isabella's second shot and came up with his own pistol, firing wildly in the dim light. Sarah heard the bullet whine past her ear as she cut Thornfield's bonds. "Isabella!" Thornfield's voice was sharp with warning. Sarah spun to see more figures emerging from the side tunnels, Dmitry's backup moving to surround them. But something was wrong with the picture. These weren't Carruthers soldiers in federal uniforms. These were men she didn't recognize, wearing the rough clothes of miners and carrying weapons that looked personally owned rather than military issue. "Santos," one of them called out. "You all right in there?" Isabella's face lit up with fierce joy. "Miguel, perfect timing. Who the hell?" Dmitry started, then stopped as he found himself surrounded by a dozen armed men who clearly weren't on his side. "Meet the Colorado Coalition," Isabella said, reloading her pistol with practiced ease. "Miners, ranchers, shop owners, and others who've lost people to Carruthers' network. They've been waiting for a chance to strike back." Miguel, a grizzled man with intelligent eyes and arms like iron, stepped forward. We heard the explosions, figured you might need assistance. Found about 20 soldiers up top, all taken care of. All of them? Thornfield asked, working feeling back into his hands. Well, most of them. Few might have run off, but they won't be reporting back to anyone soon. Miguel's gaze fixed on Dmitri. This, the Russian piece of shit who's been coordinating the kidnappings. Among other things, Isabella replied grimly. Dmitri Volkov meets some of the people whose daughters and sisters you've destroyed. The miners began closing in, and Dmitri's face went pale. Sarah could see him calculating odds, looking for escape routes and finding none. Wait, she said, an idea forming. Don't kill him yet. He's more valuable alive. Like hell, one of the miners growled. This bastard took my niece. I want to watch him bleed. I understand, Sarah said quickly. But think about it. He knows the entire network, names, locations, financial arrangements, everything. Kill him now, and that information dies with him. Dmitri's eyes narrowed. You think I'll tell you anything? I think you'll tell us everything, Thornfield said, standing despite his injuries, because the alternative is being turned over to these gentlemen for private justice, and given what you've put their families through, I suspect that would be unpleasant. The Russian looked around at the ring of hostile faces and seemed to shrink in on himself. What do you want to know? Everything, Isabella said, starting with Carruthers' current location and the operational structure of the network. For the next hour, in the flickering light of the remaining lanterns, Dmitri talked. Not willingly at first, but the presence of the grieving miners proved persuasive. He detailed routes, timetables, safe houses, corrupt officials, and financial arrangements that spanned from Denver to San Francisco to Mexico City. Sarah listened with growing horror and rage. The scope of the operation was staggering. Hundreds of women, moved like cargo, sold and resold, worked to death in illegal mining operations, or worse. The casual brutality of it, the industrial efficiency with which human lives were destroyed, made her physically sick. There's a shipment leaving Denver tomorrow, Dmitri said, his voice hoarse from talking. 30 women bound for San Francisco via railroad. They'll be transferred to ships at the docks, then taken south to Mexico. Where in Denver? Thornfield demanded. Warehouse district, building owned by Colorado Mining and Manufacturing that's one of Carruthers' front companies. They'll be moved at night, probably loaded into cattle cars marked as equipment shipments. Isabella was taking notes rapidly. Security. 12 guards plus the railroad men who've been paid to look the other way. Carruthers himself will be there to oversee the transfer. It's too valuable a shipment to trust to subordinates. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Carruthers will be there personally. Yes, he always supervises the major shipments. Doesn't trust anyone else with that much valuable cargo. Thornfield and Isabella exchanged meaningful glances. This was the opportunity they'd been waiting for, a chance to catch Carruthers in the act with enough evidence to ensure conviction, even in a corrupt court system. It's a trap, Sarah said quietly. He knows we're coming. This is too convenient. Maybe, Isabella agreed. But it's also our best chance to rescue 30 women and capture the man responsible for hundreds of disappearances. The odds are terrible. 12 guards. Unknown number of railroad security, corrupt local officials who'll be on Carruthers' payroll. Against what? Thornfield asked with a slight smile. A dozen angry miners, a federal marshal with legitimate authority, and the most effective underground railroad operator in 3 states. Miguel stepped forward. Against 50 angry miners, Marshal. Word's been spreading. Men are riding in from claims all over the territory. Every man who's lost family to these bastards wants a piece of this fight. Sarah looked around at the faces surrounding her, hardened men who'd spent their lives wresting wealth from unforgiving mountains, women who'd survived frontier hardships that would have broken most people, all united by loss and the desire for justice. When do we leave for Denver? She asked. We don't, Isabella said firmly. You're not going to Denver, Sarah. It's too dangerous. Like hell I'm not. Sarah's voice carried a steel that surprised even her. Those women in that warehouse are going through exactly what I went through. You think I'm going to sit safely somewhere while they're shipped off to God knows what kind of hell? Sarah, you're not trained for this kind of operation. You could get yourself killed or get others killed trying to protect you. Then train me, fast. Sarah met Isabella's gaze directly. I can shoot, I can think under pressure, and I know these bastards better than anyone here. I've seen their methods, their weaknesses, their blind spots. You need me." Thornfield nodded slowly. She's right. This isn't just about rescue anymore. It's about intelligence. Sarah knows how they operate from the inside. Besides, Sarah added with grim humor, if this goes wrong and we all get captured, I'm the only one here who's already survived being Carruthers' prisoner once. That might prove useful. Isabella looked like she wanted to argue further, but Miguel interrupted. Time's wasting. If we're going to reach Denver before that shipment moves, we need to ride within the hour. Agreed, Thornfield said. Isabella, can your people handle the logistics, weapons, horses coordination with local sympathizers? Already handled. I sent word 2 hours ago there'll be fresh mounts waiting at the relay stations plus ammunition and supplies. Isabella's organizational skills were formidable. Miguel, your men ready for a night raid in hostile territory. Been ready for months, just needed a target worth the risk. Sarah felt something shifting inside her, the final transformation from victim to active participant in her own fate. For months, she'd been acted upon, pushed around by forces beyond her control. Now, finally, she was going to push back. There's one more thing, she said, pulling out the letter she'd been carrying since her escape from Silver Creek. Before we go to Denver, there's something you need to know. Something Hartwell told me that I haven't shared yet. The letter was water-stained and creased from being hidden in her clothing, but the writing was still legible. Sarah had read it so many times she'd memorized every word. This is a letter Hartwell wrote to his wife the day before he was killed. I found it in Carruthers' study while they were questioning me. It details a meeting Hartwell had with a federal judge in San Francisco, a Judge Morrison, who was supposedly investigating corruption in the territorial courts. Thornfield went very still. Judge Morrison. Federal Judge Harrison Morrison. You know him. He's my uncle, and he's been investigating territorial corruption for the past year. Thornfield's voice carried a mixture of hope and apprehension. If Morrison's involved, it means the federal government is taking this seriously at the highest levels. Or it means Carruthers has corrupted federal officials too, Isabella pointed out grimly. There's only one way to find out, Sarah said, folding the letter carefully. We rescue those women, capture Carruthers, and present the evidence to Judge Morrison personally. If he's clean, we get justice. If he's corrupt, at least we'll know who our enemies really are. The plan that emerged over the next hour was audacious in its scope and complexity. They would split into 3 groups. Isabella and half the miners would create a diversion at the main railroad depot, drawing security away from the warehouse. Thornfield and the remaining miners would infiltrate the warehouse itself, securing the prisoners and gathering evidence. Sarah would remain with a small group of reserves ready to provide backup or evacuation support as needed. It was dangerous, probably insane, and almost certainly doomed to failure. But it was also their best chance to strike a crippling blow against Carruthers' network and rescue 30 innocent women from a fate worse than death. As they prepared to leave the mines, Sarah found herself thinking about all the women who'd come before Isabella's sister Maria, the girls she'd glimpsed during her own captivity, the hundreds of others who'd simply vanished without a trace. They deserved justice. They deserved to be remembered. They deserved to be avenged. For Maria, she said quietly as they mounted their horses in the gray light of dawn. For all of them, Isabella replied, her dark eyes blazing with purpose, and they rode toward Denver, and whatever destiny awaited, no longer refugees fleeing their enemies, but an army marching to war. The Underground Railroad was about to become something else entirely, a weapon of liberation pointed at the heart of the most evil enterprise the American frontier had ever seen. Behind them, smoke still rose from the ruins of Isabella's ranch. Ahead lay the most dangerous city in the Colorado Territory, where corrupt officials and criminal networks held sway over law and justice. But for the first time since her ordeal began, Sarah O'Malley wasn't afraid. She was ready to fight, and she wasn't fighting alone. The war had begun. The scream that shattered the Denver night came from the 4th cattle car, where 30 women waited in darkness for a journey that would end in hell. Sarah O'Malley crouched behind a stack of railroad ties 50 yards from the Colorado mining warehouse, her rifle steady despite the tremor in her hands. Through the scope, She could see guards moving between the train cars, their lanterns casting dancing shadows that made counting difficult. 12 guards just like Dimitri said, she whispered into the darkness. But there's something wrong, too easy. Isabella's voice came back through the night air, barely audible. Wrong how? The positioning. They're guarding the train, but not the warehouse. No perimeter security, no rooftop watchers. It's like they want us to attack. Marcus Thornfield's reply carried the weight of growing dread. Because they do. It's a trap. Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach as the pieces clicked together. The convenient timing of Dimitri's capture, the detailed information he'd provided, the almost casual revelation of Carruthers' presence, all of it designed to bring them here to this moment where they would be completely exposed. Fall back, she started to say, but the words died in her throat as spotlights blazed to life around the railroad yard, turning night into brilliant day and catching the coalition forces in the open like insects under glass. The voice that boomed across the yard through a megaphone was cultured, educated, and utterly without mercy. Marshal Thornfield, Miss O'Malley, how delightful that you could join us this evening. Please step forward where we can see you properly. Edmund Carruthers stood on the platform of the warehouse, immaculate in his evening clothes despite the late hour. Beside him were two figures that made Sarah's blood freeze. Judge Harrison, Morrison Thornfield's uncle, wearing federal robes and a smile of cruel satisfaction, and a woman Sarah had hoped never to see again. Miss Pemberton, Sarah breathed, recognizing her former employer's wife from Denver, the woman who had recommended her to the Carruthers household, the woman who had known exactly what would happen to her. You have exactly 1 minute to surrender, Carruthers called through the megaphone, or we begin executing the prisoners, one every 30 seconds until you comply. Around the railroad yard, Sarah could see the true scope of the trap. What they had mistaken for a lightly guarded shipment was actually a fortress. Armed men emerged from concealed positions behind train cars, on warehouse rooftops, and trenches dug between the tracks. At least 60 soldiers, all in federal uniforms, all carrying military-grade weapons. How many? Isabella's voice was tight with controlled desperation. Sarah did a quick count, her heart sinking with each new position she identified. Too many. 60, maybe 70. All with clear fields of fire. And Miguel's people? Sarah turned her scope toward the positions where the coalition miners had taken cover. What she saw made her stomach clench. Bodies sprawled between the railroad ties, dark stains spreading beneath them. The diversion attack at the main depot had been expected, anticipated, crushed. Miguel's down, she reported, her voice barely a whisper. They're all down. Thornfield's curse echoed through the night air. Uncle Harrison, you bastard! How long have you been working for them? Judge Morrison's laugh carried clearly across the yard. Working for them, my dear nephew, I am them. Did you really think a provincial trafficking operation could grow this large without federal protection? Without official sanction? The revelation hit like a physical blow. If federal judges were part of the network, if the corruption reached into the highest levels of territorial government, then there was no law to appeal to, no authority to trust, no hope of legitimate justice. 30 seconds, Carruthers announced pleasantly. I do hope you'll be reasonable. Miss O'Malley in particular, we have such interesting plans for your future. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of 30 innocent lives pressing down on her shoulders. Around her, she could hear the surviving coalition members checking their weapons, preparing for a fight they couldn't possibly win. Brave men who had followed her into this trap, who would die because she had believed in the possibility of justice. Don't do it, Sarah. Isabella's voice carried absolute certainty. Whatever you're thinking, don't do it. They'll kill the women anyway once they have us. Sarah knew Isabella was right. Men like Carruthers didn't leave witnesses, didn't honor agreements, didn't show mercy to those who had opposed them. Surrender would only guarantee that all of them died, probably after enduring the kind of torture that would make her previous captivity seem merciful by comparison. But she also knew that she couldn't listen to 30 women die while she crouched in the darkness like a coward. Time's up, Carruthers announced. Bring out the first one. Two soldiers dragged a young woman from the nearest cattle car, blonde perhaps 20, wearing the torn remnants of what had once been a fine dress. Even from 50 yards away, Sarah could see the terror in her face, the desperate way she looked around for rescue that would never come. "This is Margaret Hartwell," Carruthers said into the megaphone, "daughter of the late James Hartwell. She's been most helpful in providing information about her father's activities. Unfortunately, her usefulness has come to an end." Sarah's blood turned to ice water. Hartwell's daughter, the man who had died trying to expose Carruthers' network, had a daughter, and they had taken her too. The casual cruelty of it, the systematic destruction of entire families, made something snap inside Sarah's chest. She was rising from cover, rifle raised, when the shot came from an entirely unexpected direction. The soldier holding Margaret Hartwell spun around with blood blooming across his chest, his rifle clattering to the ground. A second shot took down his partner, and suddenly the railroad yard erupted in chaos as muzzle flashes lit the night from positions Sarah couldn't see. "What the hell?" Carruthers' voice cracked with shock and rage. Through the confusion of gunfire and shouting, Sarah heard a voice she recognized, young, cocky, and absolutely fearless. "Coalition forces, this is Tommy Morrison. We've got the high ground, and all the time in the world. Surrender now, or we'll pick you off one by one." Tommy Morrison, the 16-year-old sharpshooter she'd met in Silver Creek, the kid with eyes like a hawk and hands steady enough to thread a needle at 100 yards. But that wasn't possible. Tommy was just a boy, and this was the federal judge's son. Isabella breathed understanding, flooding her voice. "Harrison Morrison's boy. He's been working against his own father." The pieces clicked together in Sarah's mind with stunning clarity. Tommy Morrison, the judge's son, positioned to know everything about his father's activities. The perfect inside source, young enough to be dismissed as harmless, skilled enough to be deadly when the moment came. "Sarah," Tommy's voice carried across the yard. "The warehouse now while they're distracted." She didn't hesitate. While Carruthers' forces tried to locate and neutralize the unexpected attack from above, Sarah sprinted across the open ground toward the warehouse. Behind her, she could hear Isabella and Thornfield following along with the handful of coalition survivors who had managed to avoid the initial slaughter. The warehouse door was guarded by two soldiers, both facing outward toward the main battle. Sarah's first shot took one in the back, dropping him instantly. Isabella's pistol barked twice, and the second guard crumpled beside his partner. Inside the warehouse, the scene was worse than Sarah's worst nightmares. Dozens of women and girls chained to support beams, their clothes torn, their faces bearing the marks of systematic brutality. Some were unconscious. Others stared with the empty eyes of the broken. The youngest couldn't have been more than 14. "Jesus Christ!" Thornfield whispered, his face pale with rage and horror. "Free them!" Sarah commanded, already moving toward the nearest group of prisoners. "All of them! Fast!" But as they worked to break the chains, Sarah heard footsteps on the warehouse stairs, measured, unhurried, confident. Edmund Carruthers descended from the office level like a king surveying his domain, flanked by Judge Morrison and 6 armed guards. "Miss O'Malley," Carruthers said pleasantly, as if they were meeting at a social gathering, "I must say you've proven far more resourceful than anticipated. It's almost a shame to bring this to an end." Sarah straightened slowly, her rifle trained on Carruthers' chest. Around her, Isabella and Thornfield had their weapons drawn as well, but they were hopelessly outnumbered in the confined space. "Let them go," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "The women, the girls, they're innocent. This is between you and me." "Innocent?" Morrison laughed, the sound echoing off the warehouse walls. "My dear girl, there are no innocent people in this world, only those with power and those without. These women simply had the misfortune to be born without. They're human beings, not commodities." "Everything is a commodity, Miss O'Malley. Women, children, labor, loyalty, justice itself. The only question is price." Carruthers gestured toward the chained prisoners. "These particular commodities represent approximately $50,000 in revenue. Did you really think I would simply let them go?" Sarah felt rage building in her chest, hot and clean and overwhelming. "You're talking about murdering innocent people for money. I'm talking about business, supply and demand, profit and loss, the fundamental principles that built this great nation." Carruthers' smile was cold as winter. "You, Miss O'Malley, represent a considerable loss. Your testimony could damage our operation significantly. That makes you a liability that must be eliminated." "What about your nephew?" Isabella interjected, nodding toward Thornfield. "Are you going to kill family for your business interests?" Morrison's expression didn't change. Marcus chose his loyalties poorly. Family obligations end where profit margins begin. "You're insane," Thornfield said quietly. "Both of you. This isn't business. It's evil, pure and simple." "Evil is a luxury for those who can afford moral principles," Morrison replied. "We deal in necessities, the necessity of controlling dangerous elements, the necessity of maintaining profitable operations, the necessity of ensuring that inconvenient truths remain buried." As he spoke, Sarah noticed movement among the chained women. One of them, a girl who couldn't have been more than 16, was working at her bonds with a piece of broken chain. Her eyes met Sarah's for just a moment, and Sarah saw something there that made her heart skip determination. The girl was planning something desperate. However, Carruthers continued, "I'm not entirely unreasonable. Miss O'Malley, you have information I need, specifically the location of any evidence you may have gathered about our operations. Provide that information, and I'll ensure your death is quick and relatively painless." "And if I refuse?" Carruthers gestured toward one of his guards, who produced a branding iron from a brazier Sarah hadn't noticed. The metal glowed red-hot in the dim warehouse light. "Then you'll experience the full range of persuasive techniques we've developed over the years. I'm told they're quite effective, though the process can take several days." Sarah felt her resolve wavering. The thought of that kind of systematic torture, of being broken slowly and deliberately, brought back every nightmare from her months in captivity. But then she looked at the faces of the women around her, the fear, the desperation, the tiny spark of hope that her presence had kindled, and her strength returned. "Go to hell," she said clearly. Carruthers sighed theatrically. "I was afraid you'd say that. Very well. Guards, restrain them. We'll begin with Miss O'Malley, then work our way through her companions. Take your time, I want to enjoy this." The guards moved forward, and Sarah prepared to go down fighting. But before anyone could fire a shot, the warehouse erupted in chaos as the 16-year-old girl's desperate plan came to fruition. She had been working not just on her own bonds, but on a support chain that held a stack of heavy cargo containers. As the guards approached Sarah's group, the girl gave one final wrench to the weakened chain, and 2 tons of mining equipment came crashing down directly onto Carruthers and his men. The noise was deafening, metal on metal, screaming, cursing the crack of splintering wood as the warehouse floor gave way under the impact. Through the dust and confusion, Sarah saw Carruthers pinned beneath a massive piece of machinery, blood streaming from his head, his evening clothes torn and filthy. Judge Morrison had been thrown clear but was struggling to rise, his left leg bent at an unnatural angle. Half the guards were down, crushed or stunned by the falling debris. "Move!" Isabella shouted. "Get the women out of here!" They worked frantically to free the remaining prisoners while gunfire continued to echo from outside. Some of the women were too weak to walk and had to be carried. Others, like the brave girl who had triggered the collapse, were strong enough to help with the evacuation. "Sarah." The girl grabbed her arm as they headed for the door. "There's something you need to know. My name is Elena Santos." Sarah's heart skipped. "Santos? You're Isabella's cousin, the one who's been working in San Francisco." Elena pressed a folded paper into Sarah's hand. "The real evidence. Everything Carruthers has done, everyone he's worked with, every transaction, every location. I memorized it all and wrote it down." The paper was covered with tiny, precise handwriting names, dates, amounts, locations. At a glance, Sarah could see it contained enough information to bring down the entire network from Denver to San Francisco to Mexico City. "Elena." Isabella appeared at their side, her face transforming with joy and disbelief. "Dear God, I thought you were dead." "Nearly was. They grabbed me from the San Francisco office 3 days ago when they figured out I was feeding information to the coalition." Elena embraced her cousin quickly. "But now we can finish this. That paper contains everything, proof that goes all the way to Washington." Outside, the gun battle was winding down. Tommy Morrison's strategic position on the surrounding rooftops had allowed him to systematically eliminate Carruthers' guards while staying safely out of reach. The surviving soldiers were either dead, wounded, or in full retreat. But as they emerged from the warehouse with the rescued women, Sarah saw a sight that made her blood freeze. Edmund Carruthers stood in the doorway behind them, his face a mask of blood and rage, holding the branding iron like a weapon. He had somehow freed himself from the debris, and his eyes burned with the fury of a man who had lost everything. "You think this is over?" he screamed, raising the red-hot iron. "You think you've won? I'll burn the truth out of every one of you." He lunged toward Elena, clearly intending to destroy the woman who had been the source of his downfall. But Sarah was faster. Her rifle came up smoothly, and her shot took Carruthers' center mass, spinning him around and sending him crashing to the warehouse floor. He lay there for a moment, blood spreading beneath him, his breathing shallow and labored. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. You don't understand. This is bigger than you know, bigger than Denver, bigger than the territory. There are others." "What others?" Thornfield demanded, kneeling beside the dying man. "Washington, senators, railroad money." Carruthers' eyes were losing focus. "The network goes to the top." He died with those words on his lips, taking whatever secrets he still harbored to the grave. In the aftermath, as they tended to the rescued women and counted their casualties, Sarah found herself thinking about the price of truth. Miguel and most of his miners were dead. The coalition had been shattered, its survivors scattered to the winds. Even in victory, the cost had been terrible, but they had saved 30 lives. They had exposed a network of corruption and brutality that stretched across 3 states. And they had proof, Elena's meticulously documented evidence, that could bring justice to hundreds of victims. "What happens now?" Sarah asked as they watched the rescued women being loaded into wagons for transport to safety. "Now we take this to the federal authorities in Washington," Thornfield replied. "The real authorities, not the corrupt ones. Elena's evidence is comprehensive enough to force a full investigation. And if the corruption goes as high as Carruthers claimed," Isabella's smile was grim but determined, "then we take it to the newspapers, to the public. Truth has a way of finding the light even when powerful men try to bury it." As dawn broke over Denver, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah felt a strange sense of completion. The nightmare that had begun months ago in a wealthy man's study was finally ending. Not with perfect justice, too many good people had died for that, but with truth exposed and innocence saved. The war against the trafficking network was far from over. There would be other battles, other enemies, other prices to pay. But for the first time since her ordeal began, Sarah O'Malley was no longer fighting alone, no longer running from her past. She was part of something larger now, a coalition of the righteous, united in their determination to protect the innocent and expose the truth, no matter what powerful interests stood in their way. The price of truth was always high. But as Sarah looked at the faces of the women they had saved, she knew it was a price worth paying. The real question was whether they would live long enough to deliver that truth to those who could act on it. Because Edmund Carruthers' dying words suggested that their victory in Denver was only the beginning of a much larger and more dangerous battle. And in the distance, the sound of approaching hoofbeats warned that their enemies were already regrouping for the next assault. The train whistle that echoed across the Colorado plains at dawn carried with it the sound of freedom and the promise of a final reckoning. Sarah O'Malley stood on the observation platform of the eastbound Denver and Rio Grande, watching the mountains fade into memory as they carried Elena's evidence toward Washington, D.C. And what she prayed would be justice at last. But freedom, she had learned, always came with a price. Contact ahead. Tommy Morrison called from the locomotive cab, his young voice tight with tension. The 16-year-old had insisted on serving as their scout, using his intimate knowledge of railroad operations to guide their escape. Riders paralleling our route, military formation. Sarah raised her field glasses, scanning the horizon until she found them at least 20 horsemen keeping pace with the train, their movements coordinated and professional. Not bandits or opportunistic raiders, but soldiers. Federal soldiers, if the glint of metal on their chests was any indication. "How many?" Isabella Santos asked, moving up beside her. The elegant rancher had traded her riding clothes for the practical dress of a traveling lady, but the gun belt beneath her coat remained readily accessible. 20 that I can see. Probably more we can't." Sarah lowered the glasses, her stomach tight with familiar dread. "They're not trying to hide. They want us to see them." "Intimidation," Marcus Thornfield concluded, joining them on the platform. The federal marshal's face was grim as he studied the pursuing force. "Someone wants us to know we're being watched. Someone wants us to know we're not safe even with a train full of witnesses and evidence," Isabella corrected. "The question is, do they plan to stop us before we reach Washington, or are they content to simply let us know they could?" The answer came sooner than any of them expected. As the train rounded a curve that would take them through Devil's Canyon, a narrow passage between towering rock walls, Sarah saw the obstruction on the tracks ahead, a massive pile of boulders and timber positioned precisely where the train would have no choice but to stop. "Emergency brake!" Tommy shouted to the engineer, but they were already too close, moving too fast. The locomotive hit the barrier with a tremendous crash that sent passengers tumbling through the cars and scattered luggage across the countryside. When the dust settled and the screaming stopped, Sarah found herself sprawled across the observation platform with blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. Around her, the other passengers were picking themselves up and assessing injuries, but her attention was focused on the sound echoing through the canyon, the rhythmic thunder of approaching hoofbeats. "Everybody down," Thornfield commanded, drawing his revolvers. "This isn't an accident." The riders came from both ends of the canyon simultaneously, a coordinated assault designed to trap the train and its passengers in a killing ground. But these weren't the federal soldiers they had seen following at a distance. These were hired guns desperados with no uniforms and no scruples about firing into a crowd of innocent travelers. Sarah O'Malley. The voice that boomed across the canyon was cultured but carried an undertone of madness that made her skin crawl. "I know you're on that train. Come out where I can see you or I start killing passengers one by one." Sarah had never heard the voice before, but she recognized the type, another wealthy man accustomed to getting his way through violence and intimidation. Another link in the chain of corruption they had been fighting. "Who is that?" she called to Thornfield. "Senator William Ashford," he replied grimly, "chairman of the Senate Committee on Territorial Affairs. If Carruthers was telling the truth about the corruption reaching Washington, Ashford would be at the center of it." A senator. Sarah felt the familiar ice forming in her stomach. "We're not just fighting criminals anymore. We're fighting the government itself." "You have 60 seconds, Miss O'Malley," Ashford called again. "Then I start with the children." Through the train windows, Sarah could see the other passengers, families traveling east for various reasons, none of them having anything to do with trafficking networks or criminal conspiracies. A mother clutching her infant daughter, an elderly man trying to shield his grandsons, a young couple on their honeymoon, their faces white with terror. All of them would die because of her, because she had dared to seek justice, because she had survived when she was supposed to disappear without a trace. "Don't even think about it," Isabella said quietly, reading the expression on Sarah's face. "You surrender to him and everyone dies anyway. Men like Ashford don't leave witnesses." "Then what do you suggest?" "We're trapped in a canyon with nowhere to run and 20-plus guns pointed at us." "We fight," Tommy Morrison said, appearing beside them with a rifle that looked almost as big as he was. "My father taught me that some things are worth dying for. This is one of them." Sarah looked at the boy, barely 16, but with the eyes of someone who had seen too much and chosen to stand against it anyway. Behind him, she could see the other passengers beginning to organize themselves. The elderly man was distributing ammunition from a traveling case. The young husband was helping his wife reload a Derringer with steady hands. Even the mother with the infant had produced a small pistol from her reticule. 30 seconds, Miss O'Malley. Don't make me demonstrate my resolve on innocent people." These aren't innocent people, Sarah realized suddenly. Look at them. Really look. Isabella followed her gaze and understanding dawned on her face. They're all armed, all of them. What are the odds that every passenger on this particular train just happens to be carrying weapons? Thornfield smiled grimly. About the same as the odds that a random train derailment would occur in the one canyon where escape is impossible. This isn't an ambush, it's a setup. Time's up. Ashford's voice cracked like a whip across the canyon. Open fire! But when the shooting started, it wasn't the trapped passengers who died. The first volley came not from Ashford's men, but from concealed positions high on the canyon walls. Rifle fire rained down on the attackers with devastating accuracy, and Sarah realized that their supposed fellow passengers had been federal agents all along. U.S. Marshals. The voice that echoed through the canyon carried the authority of legitimate law enforcement. Senator Ashford, you and your men are under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and treason against the United States. The battle that followed was brief but vicious. Ashford's hired guns caught between the train and the high ground, fought with the desperation of men who knew they faced the gallows if captured alive. but they were outnumbered and outgunned by federal agents who had been planning this operation for months. When the gun smoke cleared, 12 of the attackers lay dead in the canyon dust. The rest, including Senator Ashford himself, knelt with their hands bound facing the justice they had spent years avoiding. "Marshal Thornfield," said the lead federal agent, a distinguished man with silver hair and a badge that marked him as Deputy Director of the U.S. Marshal Service. "Deputy Director Harrison sends his compliments. We've been tracking this corruption network for 6 months, waiting for someone to provide the evidence we needed to move against the leadership. Elena's documentation, comprehensive enough to justify arrests all the way to the Senate floor. We have warrants for 7 senators, 12 territorial governors, and approximately 50 federal judges across 6 states. The deputy director's smile was grim with satisfaction. "The trafficking network is finished, Marshal, completely and permanently." Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't realized she was carrying. It's really over. The criminal organization, Hoth. But there will be trials testimony, probably months of legal proceedings. You'll need to testify in federal court about what you witnessed, what you experienced, what you learned during your investigation. "I'll testify," Sarah said without hesitation, "for as long as it takes. Those women deserve justice." The deputy director nodded approvingly. "There's one more thing. The federal government is prepared to offer you a position, Miss O'Malley. We need investigators who understand how these networks operate, people who can recognize the signs and help us prevent future operations." Sarah considered the offer seriously. The idea of spending her life hunting men like Carruthers and Ashford appealed to her sense of justice. But as she looked around at the canyon, at the blood and the dust and the faces of the captured criminals, she realized that wasn't the path she wanted to take. "Thank you, but no, I'm not a hunter by nature. I'm a teacher." She thought about the rescued women, the girls who would need help healing from their trauma, the communities that would need to learn how to protect themselves. "I think I can do more good building things than destroying them." 2 weeks later, Sarah stood on the porch of a modest house in Golden, Colorado, watching the sun set over the mountains, while 37 former captives, all the women they had rescued, plus 7 others found during the federal raids, learned to read and write in the schoolroom she had established in the main hall. The house had been a gift from Marcus Thornfield, purchased with money confiscated from the trafficking network's assets. "Blood money," he had called it when he handed her the deed. "But maybe it can be turned to something clean." "How are they doing?" Isabella asked, joining her on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. The elegant rancher had become Sarah's partner in establishing what they called the Sanctuary School, a place where trafficking victims could heal while learning the skills they would need to build new lives. "Better than I expected. Elena has a natural gift for teaching mathematics. Her experience with financial records translates well to basic accounting. Margaret Hartwell is working with the younger girls on reading. And Maria, the brave one who brought down the warehouse, she wants to study law, says she's going to become a prosecutor specializing in crimes against women." Sarah smiled at the thought. "I believe she'll do it too." "And what about you? Are you healing?" Sarah considered the question carefully. The nightmares had faded, though they hadn't entirely disappeared. The hypervigilance that had kept her alive during captivity was slowly relaxing. Most importantly, the rage that had sustained her through the worst of it was transforming into something more constructive, a determination to ensure that what had happened to her never happened to anyone else. "I'm learning to," she said finally. "Some wounds take time to heal properly." "Speaking of healing," Isabella said with a sly smile, "Marcus has been asking about you, wondering when you might be ready for visitors of a personal nature." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. The relationship between her and Thornfield had been put on hold during the crisis, but the attraction was still there, stronger than ever. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him that strong women heal on their own schedule, and smart men learn to wait patiently." Before Sarah could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made both women turn toward the road. A rider was approaching at an easy canter, not the desperate pace of an emergency, but the steady rhythm of someone with important news to share. As the rider drew closer, Sarah recognized Tommy Morrison, now wearing the badge of a junior federal marshal despite his youth. His face was bright with excitement as he swung down from his saddle. "Sarah, Isabella, you need to hear this." He waved a telegram in his hand. It's from Washington. The trials are over. Sarah felt her heart skip. All of them. All of them. Senator Ashford got life in prison. Judge Morrison, my own father, got 25 years. The other senators and territorial officials got sentences ranging from 10 to life. Tommy's grin was fierce with satisfaction. And here's the best part. Congress passed the Anti-Trafficking Act last week. Unanimous vote. Makes human trafficking a federal crime punishable by death. Unanimous. Isabella looked skeptical. That seems unlikely. Turns out, public opinion is a powerful force when the newspapers get hold of evidence like Elena's documentation. When people learned how extensive the network was, how many women and children had been victimized, they demanded action. Tommy's expression grew more serious. There were riots in 3 cities when the full scope of the corruption came out. Senators who might have voted against the bill decided they valued their careers more than their criminal associates. Sarah felt tears of relief and triumph stinging her eyes. So it's really over, not just the criminals, but the system that protected them. Better than over. The federal government is establishing a permanent task force to investigate trafficking operations with offices in every major city. They're offering good pay and full federal protection for investigators willing to work dangerous cases. Trying to recruit me again. Actually, Tommy's grin returned. They're more interested in your teaching methods. Word is spread about what you're doing here, how effectively you're helping trafficking victims recover and reintegrate. They want to establish similar schools in other cities using your curriculum as a model. Sarah looked through the window at her students. Women and girls who had been written off as damaged goods who were now learning to read, to calculate, to think for themselves. They were living proof that people could heal from even the worst trauma if they were given the right support and opportunities. They want to expand this. 6 cities to start: San Francisco, St. Louis, New Orleans, Chicago, New York, and Boston. Federal funding, federal protection, full autonomy in how you structure the programs. Tommy's voice carried genuine admiration. They're calling it the O'Malley Protocol. Sarah felt the weight of possibility settling on her shoulders, not the crushing burden of other people's expectations, but the exciting challenge of turning her personal experience into something that could help thousands of others. There's one condition, Tommy added. They want you to head the entire program. National director based in Washington overseeing all 6 schools plus any additional ones they establish. Washington, D.C., with a federal salary, federal protection, and enough authority to make real changes in how the government handles trafficking cases. Tommy's expression grew serious. Sarah, they're offering you a chance to make sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else, not just here in Colorado, but across the entire country. Sarah looked at Isabella, saw the encouragement in her friend's dark eyes. Then she looked back at the schoolroom where her students were bent over their lessons with the intense concentration of people who understood that knowledge was the key to their freedom. I'll need to bring my teaching staff with me, Elena, Margaret, all of them, if they want to come. Already discussed, federal positions for anyone you want to bring plus hiring authority to recruit local staff in each city. Yeah. And this place, the original school, continues under Isabella's management with full federal support. Consider it the flagship of your national network. Sarah felt a smile spreading across her face, the first genuine smile of pure joy she had felt since before her ordeal began. When do I start? Tomorrow, if you want. There's a train leaving Denver at noon that will have you in Washington by Thursday. Give me until tonight to think about it, Sarah said, though she already knew her answer. This is a big decision. After Tommy left to make arrangements for the potential journey, Sarah and Isabella sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the mountain sky. The sounds from inside the house were peaceful, quiet conversations, the rustle of turning pages, the scratch of pencils on paper, the sounds of healing and hope. You're going to do it, Isabella said. It wasn't a question. Yes, but I'll miss this place. Miss you. I'll still be here when you need to come home, and you'll need to come home sometimes. Washington, D.C. is no place for a woman's soul to live permanently. Sarah laughed, the sound carrying easily through the clear mountain air. Is that your professional opinion, Dr. Santos? That's my opinion as someone who loves you like a sister and wants to see you happy. Isabella's voice grew more serious. Are you sure you're ready for this or running a national program? means dealing with politicians, bureaucrats, men who see women as problems to be managed rather than people to be respected. I'm sure. Those men need to learn that the women they've been dismissing are stronger and smarter than they ever imagined. Sarah stood, stretching muscles that no longer carried the constant tension of fear and hypervigilance. Besides, I won't be alone. I'll have Elena, Margaret, Maria, all the others. We've been through hell together. I think we can handle Washington. And Marcus, what about him? Sarah felt her cheeks warm again. Marcus has his own work to do. The federal marshals are expanding their operations, and he's been asked to head the new Western Division. But Washington isn't that far from Colorado, and federal marshals travel frequently on official business. Ah, so romance isn't dead after all. Romance is alive and well. It's just going to be conducted at the pace of two people who have important work to do. Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. I'm not the same woman I was before all this happened. I'm not sure I can be anyone's wife in the traditional sense. Then don't be traditional. Be yourself, the woman who survived hell and turned it into a force for good. Any man worth having will be proud to stand beside that woman, not try to diminish her to fit conventional expectations. As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of another approaching rider drifted across the evening air. This time it was Marcus Thornfield, still in his marshal's coat. Despite the late hour, his face serious, but not alarmed. Ladies, he said, dismounting and touching his hat respectfully, I hope I'm not intruding. Never, Sarah assured him, her heart skipping at the sight of his familiar gray eyes. Tommy brought news from Washington. Good news. I heard. The whole territory's heard by now. Word travels fast when justice finally catches up with corrupt politicians. Marcus's smile was warm with genuine pleasure. I also heard about the job offer. Congratulations. I haven't accepted it yet. But you're going to. Again, it wasn't a question. Yes, I think I am. Marcus nodded slowly as if he had expected that answer. Good. The country needs someone like you in a position to make real changes. Too many good people have suffered because the system failed them. What about us? Sarah asked, surprising herself with her directness. Is there an us to consider? Marcus's smile widened, transforming his weathered features. Sarah O'Malley, are you asking me about my intentions? I suppose I am. Then I suppose I should be direct in return. Marcus stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. I love you. I love your strength, your intelligence, your courage, your refusal to be broken by experiences that would have destroyed most people. I love the way you play piano, and the way you stand up to corrupt senators, and the way you've turned your pain into purpose. Sarah felt her breath catch. That's quite a list. I'm not finished. I also love the fact that you're about to become one of the most important women in federal law enforcement, and I wouldn't dream of asking you to give that up for domestic tranquility. Marcus's expression grew more serious. I know I can't offer you a conventional marriage, Sarah. My work will take me all over the territory, and yours will keep you in Washington most of the time. But I can offer you partnership, respect, and a love that will endure whatever challenges we face. Are you proposing to me, Marshal Thornfield? I'm proposing that we build something new together, a marriage of equals who support each other's missions while creating something beautiful between us. Marcus reached into his coat and produced a small velvet box. If you're willing to take that kind of risk. Sarah looked at the box, then at Marcus's face, then at Isabella, who was grinning like a woman who had been expecting this moment for weeks. Through the window, she could see her students still bent over their lessons, proof that healing was possible, that new beginnings could grow from the ashes of old tragedies. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'm willing to take that risk. The ring was perfect. A simple gold band set with a small diamond that caught the starlight like a promise. As Marcus slipped it onto her finger, Sarah felt the last of her old fears finally falling away. She was no longer the terrified governess who had witnessed a murder in Denver. She was no longer the broken captive who had survived unspeakable abuse. She was no longer the angry victim seeking revenge against her tormentors. She was Sarah Katherine Ali, educator, federal administrator, and soon-to-be wife of Marcus Thornfield. She was a woman who had stared into the abyss of human cruelty and emerged with her humanity intact. She was living proof that justice was possible, that healing was achievable, that love could triumph over hate. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning in Washington, D.C., Sarah stood before the assembled representatives of the Anti-Trafficking Task Force and delivered her first quarterly report. The numbers were encouraging: over 200 women and girls rescued from trafficking operations, 47 arrests of network operators, and 12 schools now operating under the O'Malley Protocol. But more important than the numbers were the stories. Women like Elena, who had completed her law studies and was now prosecuting trafficking cases in San Francisco. Girls like Maria, who was attending university in Chicago while working part-time at the local sanctuary school. Survivors who had found their voices, their strength, their hope for the future. After the meeting, Sarah walked through the streets of the capital city thinking about the journey that had brought her here. From an auction block in Silver Creek to the halls of federal power was a distance that couldn't be measured in miles. It was a distance measured in courage, in the willingness to transform suffering into purpose. Her work was far from finished. There were still traffickers operating in remote territories, still corrupt officials to be exposed, still women and children who needed rescue and healing. But for the first time since her ordeal began, Sarah felt confident that the tide was turning. Justice was no longer a distant dream, but a present reality. That evening, as she sat at the piano in her Georgetown home, a wedding gift from Marcus playing the same nocturne she had performed in Isabella's ransacked ranch house, Sarah reflected on the price of truth. It had cost her innocent safety, the simple life she had once imagined for herself. It had cost Miguel and his miners their lives. It had cost families across the territory their peace and security. But it had also bought freedom for hundreds of women who would otherwise have died in captivity. It had bought justice for victims whose suffering had been ignored by corrupt systems. It had bought hope for future generations who would grow up in a world where trafficking was a federal crime punishable by death. The price of truth was always high. But as Sarah played the final notes of the nocturne and listened to them fade into the Washington night, she knew it was a price worth paying. Outside her window, the lights of the capital city twinkled like stars, each one representing lives touched by the work she and her colleagues were doing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new cases, new opportunities to turn pain into purpose. Tonight, she was simply Sarah O'Malley Thornfield, a woman who had survived hell and emerged with her soul intact, playing music in a city where justice was no longer just a word in a legal textbook, but a living reality that she had helped create. The melody of freedom had found its perfect resolution at last. Author's note: this concludes the 5-part saga of Sarah O'Malley, whose journey from victim to victor demonstrates that even in the darkest circumstances, courage and determination can overcome injustice. Her story reminds us that true strength lies not in avoiding suffering, but in transforming it into something meaningful and lasting.